Money does not make a person, not a man, not a woman, but it can ruin you very easily. We lived in a tiny, tiny little house. Yeah, we all slept in the living room on one bed, and the bathroom and the kitchen were the same, which was really gross. And I loved that house. There was actually an ice making plant where you could still get the bricks of ice right up the street. And I took pottery classes there, and little town of Sierra Madre. It was amazing. And as my dad's company grew more, he became very wealthy. And by the time I was an early teen, we had Ferraris and Rolls Royces, limos parked in the driveway, and things like what you wore and what you looked like became more important. Who we hung out with was very important to my parents. So things kind of changed from that freedom and happiness of childhood into a more regulated imagery of what we were supposed to be. But behind the scenes was really hard, because as my dad got more money, he partied more, he drank more, did more cocaine. I think one of the epic stories for me growing up as a child is my mom had gone out and got a big, beautiful birthday cake for my dad, and we had taken it to church the night before because his birthday was on Sunday and we were all going to go to church that day. And I was so excited to celebrate my dad. We didn't get a lot of time with him because he was always working. And my mom was really excited too. Well, my dad never came home that night. And at about 9 o'clock, my mom packed my brother and I into a car, and we drove to my dad's office where a massive party was going on. And she had heard on KRLA, and his office was right down the hall from KRLA, that they were celebrating my dad's birthday at his office. Massive party, and she didn't go in, but she sent my brother and I in. And I didn't know at the time what was on the table, but as an adult, I walked in, I thought there was snow all over his desk, but it was large amounts of cocaine. And my dad's head was bobbing up and down. And we came back out and kind of reported what we told my mom, and we drove home. And of course, my dad couldn't wake up in time for church. My mom was humiliated. And she later found out that her sister had arranged for that party to take place. And my dad allowed that to happen. And it was a lot of fighting behind the scenes. But if the doorbell rang, everything changed and appearance became, we're just this beautiful family. And so it was very confusing as a child to see the conflict and then see the facade put on so quickly. And as a child, you know it's fake. And I began to look at all the adults in my life like that. Like that was normal. All the friends that came in and out, and I could look at them and know, and a lot of them, even though they were district attorneys and some of them judges and high-powered businessmen, a lot of them were going to jail for things. And there was a lot of turmoil and chaos constantly. And I'm going to say probably by 15, and my brother was 18, things had gotten really, really bad. One of my brother's friends decided to break into the house and steal money that my mom had been putting away to take her mom to Europe. But she wanted it to be her teaching money, not my dad's money. When I came home from school, my entire room had been torn apart by the police, and my brother's room. And there was a lot of screaming and yelling, and I was very confused. And I remember calling a friend to come get me, and I didn't return home for 4 or 5 days. I was just mortified. I knew that because my brother was such a partier, that it was probably one of his friends, and it did turn out to be one of his friends. And we had to go to court for it, and I had to testify. And that was terrifying at 16. To be in that huge courtroom, being in, and they tried to make it look like it was me. What drugs had I done? What alcohol had I drank? Did I steal the money from my mom? I remember my mom kept giving me Xanax or some type of blue tranquilizer pill And I slept for 3 days after because I took so many because I was so nervous. And that was kind of the roller coaster of the childhood. My brother, at one point, my parents had they tried to put him in Outward Bound, but he left. And they put him in a hospital because affluenza is real. And both my brother and I suffered from it. You can't give somebody everything and never give them a life challenge or teach them how to live life and expect them to be okay. So by 16, I was trying to navigate life, but I spent a lot of time in my bedroom crying, a lot. And when I was 18 and ready to go to college, my parents are like, there was no choice of staying home and growing more. It was, that's what's going to look right, is you going off to college. But I had zero skills. I didn't have life skills. I didn't have really even people skills. I remember if a man tried to talk to me, my face would turn bright red. It was very internal. And I was used to the roller coaster of problems. And I was used to everything would always be okay because there was so much money. And money fixed everything. Because that's what I'd been taught. So as I started to experience college and hang out with people who didn't grow up like I did, I realized there was more out there. But when I was 22, my dad dipped into trust funds for his business, got caught, and was convicted to 6.5 years in prison. And my whole world changed. I lost the home I lived in, the car I lived in, the $500 a month I lived on. I was homeless. I found myself searching for anything to make myself feel good, which only got me to where I was, dating people. I ended up pregnant. I had no direction. My father was in prison. I didn't even have a phone number for my mom or my brother. I was completely alone and I had no skills. But I started cleaning houses for a cleaning company, and the woman that owned it was just this loving, amazing person. I started working at Body Sweet, which sold essential oils, which I loved doing. And I started finding things that I really liked to do. They were these small pleasures of going to the beach or hanging out with real people and friends. And it didn't involve putting on makeup and having the perfect clothes and making sure you looked okay. It was just real. And I loved that. It was a torturous time of being angry at my mom, being angry at my dad, visiting my dad for the first time in Folsom Prison. I will never forget. Kind of felt like an e-ticket ride at Disneyland at first, because you got on an old bus and you were going through and he's playing Johnny Cash and you can see the bullet holes. I'd worn all the wrong clothes because I did not know what you were supposed to wear to prison. Had to rip out my underwires of my bra. And I was wearing jeans, which the prisoners wear jeans. You can't wear those. So we had to go to the welcome house where I got a pair of turquoise sweats to put on that said, "Welcome to Folsom," and puffy paint up the side. Looked about the worst I could look. Had been crying hysterically. I went to go see my dad, who was in general population at Folsom Prison, which was something I had never experienced, or I'd only seen this kind of stuff on movies. And what I can say is through that heartache and that hardship, I grew. Every time things got harder, I grew. And I learned. And I succeeded. And even the smallest of those things that I surpassed built me stronger and stronger. When you have all that money, nothing's an accomplishment. Because you can't really be accomplished until you've made as much money as your father, or really everything is atoned to my dad. Nothing's atoned to you. So you don't get self-pride, you don't get self-recognition, you don't learn those building steps of working hard to achieve anything. And nothing ever feels like a good enough achievement for the wealthy narcissist you're living with. And it was the same for my mom. So most amazing person in my world today, and I love her dearly, but she was just surviving herself. The facade was so pretty. We had everything. We had the cars, the monies, the vacations. But behind the scenes, there was nothing. There was no connection. There was no closeness. There was no learning. There was no bond. You couldn't get close to God because you weren't even allowed to. You weren't allowed to. The God in the home was the man making the money. And so there was no connection. It was like being lost. It's like you're always lost. And nothing felt right. Your clothes never feel right. Your hair never felt right. I felt like a clown if I had to put on all the makeup. But I loved that my parents loved nature. So that was the one thing that was the saving grace for me, was all of our summers were spent in Washington where none of the money mattered. Our neighbors would sit and fart at the dinner table. I will never forget having dinner with them the first time and the look on my mom's face, because it was so real and so raunchy and so fun. And we'd never experienced that. Watching my neighbor lay out by the lake with Nair on, just things that we would never do because of the perception. So at the lake, I got to meet these amazing people that built log cabins and were naturalists and hiked all the time. And it just gave me a very different view. And at a very young age, I decided that's who I want to be. That's who I want to be, not this. There's no joy in this. And so after going to college and being 22, my dad lost everything. The condo I lived in that he bought was foreclosed on. My car was taken, and the $500 a month stopped instantly. I had nothing. I jumped out my car before they took it so that I could buy it back from an auction. And that was all I had, was my car. And I lived in that car until some neighbors offered their couch and to help me. And during that time, I made horrible decisions. I didn't have anything to fall back on. I didn't have that cushion of the money. I didn't have a person in my life. I made bad decisions. I ended up pregnant. I got an abortion. It was a very hard time. And decisions had to be made so quickly because it was survival. It was pure survival. I remember my dad, after that first visit to Folsom Prison, my dad got transferred to California Men's Colony, which is in San Luis Obispo. And every Thursday night I was expected to show up there to visit him. And I remember I was so broke that I would literally look on the sidewalk for quarters so that I could feed my dad out of the vending machine at jail. And it was so different than being able to pull out the American Express card and buy whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. It was just such a different life. But there was so much feeling to it. And I would cry every single night I visited my dad. It was horrific to leave my dad in prison. It felt horrible. But I was still so free in other ways. I was free to get to know so many diverse people without the judgment. They weren't like, oh, you have all that money. Oh, you're fine. You're taken care of. There was true empathy I was feeling for people that didn't have empathy for me before. And their empathy was because I experienced pain and heartache in a way. And the people in my parents' world weren't like that. There wasn't love and empathy for each other. It was more like competition of who's the bigger dog. And so that's what you grow up with. That's all you know. So to be able to see things in a different light at 22, right when your brain is, kind of getting there, it was just a very different experience. I had no connection to any family except for my dad calling me from prison almost every night. And it was hard. I cried a lot. I remember getting my first place, and it was a converted barn in San Luis Obispo overlooking Avila Beach. And I had a roommate, and I loved that place. And then I bought a Cal 28 sailboat, that was moored in Morro Bay, and it had a 100-year mooring, so I had no rent, nothing, but I did have to row out to the boat every day and row in. And depending on where the tide was, that could be hard or easy. But I loved it. I loved living out there. I felt very safe, and I felt very cocooned. I had a little wood burning stove and a little porta potty out there, and I had that and the place I rented. So I had two options, and I just met amazing people that didn't have money but had these amazing lives. And through them, I learned what life was really about. I learned spirituality. I learned to connect with God. I learned the power of prayer, which is probably the most important part. Because when you don't have a healthy father, and you realize you do have a healthy heavenly father, it's life-changing to know that, yes, this humanly earthly father makes mistakes, because that's who we're supposed to be. I make mistakes on a daily basis. But in the life I grew up in, you weren't allowed to, and you were shamed for it, instead of learning how to grow through it. Everybody in my family was an alcoholic, so there wasn't a lot of support. It was really hard. And visiting my dad in prison was incredibly hard. It was embarrassing, and it was hard. So after he got out of prison, but he did the California Shuffle, Folsom Prison to CMC to Chino, and I have visited him in all of those prisons. And once he got out, he really expected us to take care of him in many ways. He expected people to give him money. The most important thing for him was to get another Mercedes, and find a wealthy woman. That was what he told my brother was important, that my brother should find a wealthy woman and that I should find a wealthy husband. I'd already decided I never wanted that lifestyle, ever. I did not want to live that convoluted, chaotic, constant up and down. I just wanted middle. I always remember as a kid, I just want to be in the middle. So through it, I mean, I like I said, I didn't talk to my mom for years. But my dad, with his narcissistic ways, it's like claws in you. I still regret today that I was even angry at my mom at some point, this loving woman who tried so hard for us. And here I was so connected to my dad. I know it hurt her. But I had been trained to be addicted to the money and addicted to this man. And I'd been taught, he was my life. And so even through prison, I was that loyal daughter, it was very hard. And even when he got out of prison, it was trips. Oh, I have to have surgery. And I'd, come up and take him and do everything. And he would call me daily, and I was his sounding board. It was very hard. And then I found a man, and we fell in love. And my dad told me he wasn't good enough because he didn't make enough money. He was a heavy equipment operator, local union, but I loved him. I was happy. And yes, we were poor, living in an apartment together here, in La Mesa, and, would save up enough money to maybe have a Friday night dinner, go to soup plantation. It was these small things, but we were together and we were doing things together. I never saw my parents do things together, ever. So I found meaning. But even then, my mom and I's relationship took a long time. She was an alcoholic, so she had to heal from that. And she stopped drinking. But we were so far apart. It took years for us to come back together. And it was a slow process. Today, my mom is my best friend. She is my biggest hero. And the one gift that she taught me, and at 22, I was like, Would you stop saying that? Why do you always have to say that? Happiness is an inside job. And it is the biggest truth. That it literally is everything. There is no one person. There is no amount of money that can make you happy. You have to find that yourself. You have to be able to wake up every day and be grateful. And on the hardest of days, you got to wake up and pray. And pray and know that the Holy Ghost and Heavenly Father is with you. Even if you aren't religious, even if you've never prayed before, that simple act can change your whole life. And it has to do with faith. It doesn't have to be faith in God. It could be faith in anything. I used to not believe in God. I was spiritual in my 20s, but not religious. Now I've combined both. I'm all of it. And I have found that being in the middle is great. I love my middle life. Yes, once in a while I want to win the lottery. And go do amazing things. But as my friends say, Allie, it wouldn't be worth it because you'd give it all away. Because I have found that giving to others, once you heal yourself, the biggest gift you can give is giving to others. It doesn't have to be money. It can be time. It could be talking. It could be, but that is the true gift, is being able to get to the point where you can give. I have seen my brother almost die. I have seen my mom very close. My dad did die from alcoholism. And I have seen them all come back. And come back stronger and more loving. And money does not make a person, not a man, not a woman, but it can ruin you very easily. You have to be strong if you're going to be wealthy. I really do see money as kind of the root of all evil. We all need it to exist. I'm a little jealous of those, men in Alaska that can go out there and hunt and just leave everything behind here. Literally, their gun is their money. That's their wealth. And I watch those shows and I'm like, oh, that would be just so freeing, because I know that feeling. And when I see somebody that has grown up with the money and it's never left and they still have it, I feel a little sorry for them, because there's so much you miss. There's so many times you go, well, I can't talk to that person. I mean, look at the way I'm dressed. I have my makeup on. Look at them. You miss that opportunity to meet amazing people, amazing stories that carry you through your hard times. And you tend to just hang out with those same people that have that same level. And they're not able to be supportive of you because they don't even know themselves, because they're defined by money. And it's just a piece of paper. It shouldn't define somebody. So when I meet somebody that's wealthy, I try and remember that and look for the real human in them. And not that facade that they have to put to carry. It's, but when my father passed, I looked on my Facebook after I noted it. And the one thing people said, all the kids said that I grew up with now, yes, we are elderly now, but we were kids, was that your dad was so generous. He let us drive his cars all the time. Like, the one thing they remembered are his cars and driving his cars. And I thought, gosh, who wants to be remembered for their cars? Like, that's what everybody remembers him for, is letting him drive the Rolls Royce or the Ferrari. And it was a kind act and a cool thing to do for kids. But I want to be remembered for more than my car. I want to be remembered for what I gave to society, and not what I look like or what I drove. The most freeing part is being able to wear raggedy clothes and feel okay with it. because I was not allowed to go out of the house without wearing my Nordstrom shopper picked out clothes and makeup, full makeup. And it was very important. So being able to live my life and just be free of having those, I can't tell you how restraining money is, because there's so much you can't do when you have to hold that image. There's so much you can't say, so much you can't do, and so much you can't be.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Let's say with this wisdom, with this things that you've learned over your life, let's say you were able to redo and you had all that money. What would you do with it and how would you live?
You know, I think about that sometimes, especially since we've lost everything. And there are things like our cabin in Washington that meant so much to me. And my heart is still so there with the people, but I don't get to see it. It's probably the one thing that still really hurts me the most. There was no money there. That was a cabin. It had an outhouse. Our pipes froze in the winter. I miss that. I miss that place that was my whole, I used to talk to the lake. You know, I built houses for the fairies. I fished, I ate, and I loved it. You know, sometimes I dream of if I could have known, I would have taken a lump sum from my dad and hid it away so that I could still have that, right? That would be my thing. I think I'd be a very shallow person.
You still would be, with all you know.
I couldn't have known it unless it was all gone. My message to people is find your faith, find your hope. It will take time to heal. But once you do, you will be able to give back, and then you will find true happiness. Because when you can give back, you've reached that point where you can find that and feel that goodness, that greatness of, God, I told that lady she looked beautiful today, and I could see how it made her feel. It could be just that one little thing, a smile, a wink, a laugh. Money doesn't make a person. And it doesn't matter how much money you have if you have no life skills. If you can't empathize with another human, and if you can't give, and not money, but give of yourself back to the human race, you'll never be a full human being.
Empty.
Yeah, you will be an empty shell.